we use our technology to investigate reality. I wonder if that's part of the problem. That is to say that we shouldn't be using technology to find reality, but rather
Yeah.
the reality is right here. And like that you, Jesse, you're so powerful, like so effing powerful.
You are too.
Like yeah, like Gohan from Dragon Ball Z. If you ever watched that, it just needs to be unlocked.
Yeah.
It's like that, or maybe it is unlocked.
Super Saiyan.
Like right, and your Super Saiyan is your capacity to love other people, and like maybe that is like way more powerful than any technology, and that's the most real.
Yeah, I'm with
and
you.
It's like satanic or upside down to think what we should use is technology to investigate reality. It's a complete reversal, and it's a distraction. So anyway, I want to know what you think.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, that's a typical. What is the Faustian bargain is for forbidden knowledge, right? And it's you sell your soul to the devil because you want to know the truth, but maybe the truth is less important in some abstract factual sense, and ontological reality is less important than, like you said, kind of leading from the heart, leading a true, honest life in accordance with virtues that, for all we know, say there is some higher transtemporal alien realm, it maybe that's the currency, and maybe our sort of capitalist construct, or where we barter for things. We have currency that's fungible, and then and we have limited real estate, and and we have possessions. Maybe currency. Maybe the currency up there is actually love and the four virtues or something.
Yeah, isn't there a sighting where some other beings came to some people and said, "You're so powerful because you have a." Because what was it? Was it the Ariel school or no?
A lot of the Ariel school testaments, they are told by the alien, like, you don't realize how special and powerful you are. And that's a common trope among other alien abductions as well, which I find fascinating. Yeah, no, tell me. Yeah, what do you think yeah.
I think the process of science is the exact opposite of that. It's saying, how not special are we? Let's keep removing ourselves from being special over and over and over and over. And then we look for, where are we special? But we've saturated ourselves with the doctrine of unspeciality. And so.
No, I love that. I love that. Even think about the word high tech, right? It's like the tech is on high. Like, you are outsourcing your power to the high tech, the high priest, but now it's the high tech or whatever.
Interesting.
And so I think there is something about science where you do feel, it's like Bertrand Russell wrote about, like, he looked up at the stars and he just felt so small. And there's something about science where post-Copernican revolution, especially, humans are becoming a smaller and smaller part of the picture in some ways, right? It's like, well, maybe the Earth's not the center of the universe. And, maybe maybe carbon-based life is like one form of life, but maybe there's silicon-based life, and we should experiment with that in labs. And maybe a la Michael Levin's work, maybe the EM field can create interesting biological von Neumann replicators that are like non-human, but they're like from human, like we can rinse a primordial cell, create a xenobot that and it's like increasingly like humans are kind of out of the picture, and it's like, how do we create some like optimal functioning life form? And I do think there's an interesting possible, I don't want to say Luddite because that's too extreme, but like backlash to that, where it's like reining that in, where it's like, well, you're alive and you're really, there's something really special about your life, and the things that are presented to you are not maybe by chance or by coincidence. And maybe instead of being obsessed with AI, which I view of as, it's sort of if this is a larger algorithm, if you think that, maybe you have an IT view of the universe like Wolfram, the AI we're creating is definitely a bit compressed version of that. So it's like, if we're going to explore things, I think there's something really interesting about human consciousness, which is why I love your show, human biology, and humans themselves. Like, what are we? That goes unexplored by a lot of conventional science, at least.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, you prompted it.
Continue. Yeah. Yeah, well, something that I love that you said is that you said the word human and then you said, what are we? And so something that I don't like when what that people do is when they just use the word human and then they don't follow it up with we. And the reason they do that is because they want to distance themselves and show how rational they are. So for instance, they'll say, humans are so petty. You're a human. Why don't you say we are so petty? And who do you think you're speaking to? Or other people. So just say we.
Right.
When people say human, humans are such strange creatures. Well, they break up with someone, breaks up with them. Humans are such strange creatures. Who are you talking about? Why are you acting as if you're distinguished from them?
Right. It's like you're some sort of alien, or you're too noble to like you're not a part of it. Like you're not. Yeah, exactly.
They're clinical and operating as if they're a scientist viewing something else from a lab, distanced from themselves.
Totally.
And so that's why I don't like when people use the word human most of the time. I think they should be using the word we.
Yeah. And there's this.
But you did follow it up with we.
There's this weird, almost paradox that, like, I feel like once you realize your depravity, actually, Peter Thiel, who I worked for, has a favorite philosopher named Rene Girard.
Speaking of depravity.
No, he's the best.
Yeah, but we'll get to yeah, of course.
I'll defend him to the death. So
no, I don't know. I'm just kidding around. I'm kidding around. Don't
okay,
worry.
All good.
Yeah. Often I feel like my brain is getting in its own way. I know what I should do. I know what's good for me. I just can't seem to bring myself to do it. I'm sure many of you can relate to racing thoughts keeping you up at night, or just that general feeling of being held back, even undermined by your own mind. That's where therapy comes in, and BetterHelp is here to make it easier than ever. I've personally enjoyed how specific they pair you up with a therapist. They ask you a slew of questions about what type of therapist you want, what their gender is, their religious beliefs. For instance, maybe you want something more secular or more tactical. Maybe you want spiritual wisdom from a specific religious text, or maybe you want to integrate more meditative practices if you're more Easternly inclined. It's astounding how much effort they put into ensuring that you're well matched. BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. For myself, it took approximately 12 minutes. And then within 2 days, you get matched with a licensed therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So, make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/toe today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/TOE.
But one of his favorite philosophers is Rene Girard. And Peter's a very deep thinker. And Rene Girard is this French philosopher. And he talks about sort of people having these conversion experiences or hierophanies. And he has his own conversion experience, actually. And
Peter.
No, Girard does. And it's this really interesting thing where it's almost like once he realizes his own depravity, he grew up like in Avignon in France, and he would, drive sports cars, and he was into models, and he was as mimetic as the next person, and that becomes his theory that humans are very mimetic. Yes. But he has this sort of conversion experience of sort of realizing his own depravity, and then that creates like newfound enlightenment. And so it's this bizarre paradox.
That's so
of like
interesting.
once you realize your own depravity, then you reach upwards. You're instead of your tether being horizontal to like and mimetically pinging off other people's desires, your tether becomes transcendent and moves upwards, and you realize that you have all these animal instincts and urges that are sort of very finite and depraved, and then that allows space for what he would call the kingdom of heaven, or I don't know what the word, some sort of transcendent tether.
So would it be the case then that our culture, with its emphasis on removing shame and removing sin, is doing the opposite of what we should be doing? What we do is we look at ourselves and we're like, okay, well, what's something that I'm made to feel horrible for, or that I just indeed feel guilty about? The difference between shame and guilt. And how do I remove those? Well, I say that there's nothing that's objectively moral. So we do that, and we call that enlightenment.
Right.
There's another route, which is, let me think not only about how am I sinful now, but how am I more sinful? Like, in what other ways am I malicious? What other activities or frames of mind I hold that are malignant and wicked and embittered? And if I'm honest with myself, I should stop.
Totally. if people did real audits on their motivations for things, it would usually tether to the 7 deadly sins, or often. Very few people act out of pure magnanimity, benevolence, selflessness. Yes. And often it's this sort of transactional symbiotic that, it's not always like, zero sum, but it often tethers down to some base primitive survival instinct. And that's okay. But it's also very important to admit. And I think the people I'm actually more okay with people who are a little more overtly, not evil, but like they sort of admit that they're like, they lean into like, okay, I'm a little controversial and I've got bad instincts and I'm flawed.
You prefer the wanton self-awareness to the noble ignorance.
Exactly. Like I'm not a fan of Trump. I don't like Trump. Caveat this with it. But in some ways, Trump is an overt gangster, where Clinton is an overt one, a covert one, where it's like you're sort of this like crazy kleptocrat, where the Gini coefficient, the main measure of wealth inequality, grows more under your administration than anybody. You have Larry Summers in there, kind of, doing a bunch of magic tricks or whatever. And you're sort of, you have NAFTA, and you're sort of just completely outsourcing the American middle class and manufacturing base. And you're flying with Epstein, every 26 times or whatever. But then you have all these like virtues. You're a virtue signaler, and you act like you're so amazing or whatever. And it's like, I don't like Trump, but give me Trump over that guy, like it's like that moment. I think when Trump shifted a lot of the American voting base was when he was debating Hillary Clinton, and she goes, "You've systematically avoided taxes, and you haven't paid any of your taxes." And Trump goes, "Yeah, I have, and so have you, and all of your donors." And there's something super refreshing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Chappelle does an amazing, and Chappelle's also not a fan of Trump, but he does this amazing bit, and he goes, "In that moment, a star was born." And it's true. He's just like telling it like it is.
That's
He's
so
like, "Look,
funny.
we live in this corrupt kleptocracy. Government bureaucrats are stealing all sorts of things. The rich is not treated like the middle class and the poor, and yet you have one side that's sort of owning up to it or whatever, and then this other side, it's sort of this bait and switch, like I'm going to try to buy off the votes of the poor and coastal elites by like saying the right things, but like you're not doing anything to like steer the ship in a different direction, in my opinion.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here. Enjoy. Subscribe to Theories of Everything to get notified of upcoming podcasts, as there are new full-length podcasts every week on the topics of mathematics, physics, consciousness, free will, and AI.